The purpose of this lab was to understand the relationship between drag forces as well as other variables that can influence drag forces. And our group in particular was interested in studying air drag, which is essentially the opposing force that is encountered by objects that are moving or colliding with air molecules. There are many different factors that can influence the drag force, including the inclination of an object with respect to the direction of the fluid movement, mass, as well as compressibility of air. However, since our balloons weighed relatively the same, we decided to focus on the surface area of the balloon, or size of the balloon instead. So our research question was, how does the size of the balloon impact the air resistance of the drag of the balloon is experiencing? And we can focus on quantifying the relationship between the balloon mass and air resistance, and notice that as the surface area increased, the balloon reached a terminal velocity that was lower. Understanding these relationships are important to concepts such as aerodynamics, as well as the safety and performance optimization. In class, we learned that there was a relationship between the resistive force and the gravitational force, and that was that the resistive force would eventually become equal to the gravitational force acting on an object, meaning that the object would eventually reach a terminal velocity and that the object would not move anymore. In the image on the top, we can see a representation of the system schema for this situation. In our system, we have the balloon, the ground, and the air molecules. Between the balloon and the ground, there's gravitational force that is present, and between the air and the balloon, there's contact as well as frictional force present. The frictional force is essentially representing the air resistance that is present, and that is essentially slowing the balloon down until it reaches the terminal velocity. There's a star next to the gravitational force between air and ground, because there are many different forces that could be present between air molecules and the ground itself. Next, energy pie charts were created, and we can see that as the balloon falls, the kinetic energy as well as the internal energy is increasing until they are both about equal. This makes sense because the frictional energy or internal energy will eventually become equal with kinetic energy, slowing the balloon down as mentioned before. To the right, there is another representation of the gravitational force and the resistive force becoming equal. However, there is another relationship present in that both forces will become greater with the larger balloon because there is more surface area present. For our experimental design, we dropped 3 different size balloons from a height of 2.7 meters. There was a green balloon that had a radius of 82 centimeters with a mass of 2.9 grams, the orange balloon with a radius of 52 centimeters and a mass of 2.5 grams, the blue balloon with a radius of 44 centimeters and a mass of 2.55 grams. And next, we used Tracker to track these balloons. We used the data from Tracker to code in GlowScript and model our research. This helped us then better understand the relationship between balloon size and air drag or air resistance. So this is another representation that we considered in addition to using Tracker and GlowScript. We noticed that when we inputted our equations as well as our masses for the balloons, that the balloon with the smaller diameter reached a terminal velocity faster. So when we run this program, we can kind of see this relationship. So this was already discussed before, but to recap, drag force is essentially the opposing force that is experienced by objects when traveling through the air. The gravitational force is equal to the drag force, but in the opposite direction, and this means that the resistive force is eventually going to be equal to the drag force, and that the object is going to reach a terminal velocity. Objects with different shapes are influenced by drag force differently. An example is if you compare a plane with a helicopter. The plane is going to be less impacted by a drag force, as the pointed shape makes it very aerodynamic and easy to cut through air molecules, whereas the helicopter not so much. So the blue balloon had a terminal velocity of 2.19 plus or minus 0.01 meters per second in Tracker. The orange balloon had a terminal velocity of 1.606 plus or minus 0.009 meters per second, and the green balloon had a terminal velocity of 1.259 plus or minus 7.27 times 10 to the negative 2 meters per second. As we move to the rightmost picture, we are increasing the radius and hence the terminal velocity is lower, showing this relationship between resistive force being greater for an object with a larger surface area. So as shown through this data in Tracker as well as in GlowScript, we can conclude that there is a correlation between the radius of the balloon and the rate at which the balloon reached a terminal velocity, showing that the larger objects have a higher drag or resistive force, and we cannot conclude that there's a causal relationship between the two variables because there were many sources of error that were present and that the camera was not kept still when filming, so there could be errors with regards to calibration stick and Tracker, and also that we might not have been using the same point of reference each time as well on the balloon. Additionally, we should note that although the code can give us a clear picture of the relationship between the radius and drag or air resistant forces, It cannot accurately represent our data because it does not account for sources of error or confounding variables that may have been present in our experiment.